Genshin Impact 5.0's banners look stacked, and with so many exciting new characters coming out, along with the return of some powerful mainstays, it's very hard to decide who to spend your Primogems on this time around. Today, I aim to help you decide who to spend your precious Primogems on, evaluating who'll get you the most bang for your buck depending on your account setup. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. A quick note before we begin. This video serves as a nice TLDR of who you should consider pulling for. I'll be making individual videos on each character that's coming up to evaluate their individual pros and cons more in depth, which will help you better decide whether you want them or not. Okay, cool, let's go. We'll start with Mualani, who'll be the first new 5-star being introduced of Notlon's inception into the game. Mualani is a Hydra DPS who enjoys both Vaporized teams and the more unique Burn Vape teams. She's a nuke-based unit who excels specifically in single target, making her a fantastic choice for the more boss-heavy Spiral Abyss. She has excellent mobility within her kit, and appears to have an excellent form of fast travel in the overworld with her Shark Surfboard. She's got very high potential already, especially considering that Movu Ika isn't out yet, so you can only imagine how powerful Mualani is yet to become. This makes her a very stable pull, as she is already a splendid DPS, while also having the potential to vastly expand in the future. Not to mention how, as of now, she has a very varied pool of teammates that she can utilize, from the ones that you'd expect like Nahida, Zhongli, and Xiangling, to far more unconventional picks like Xinyan, Dia, and C0-5 Candice. Dia will be a free available option during 5.0 thanks to the standard 5-star selector, and both Xinyan and Candice are very unconventional 4-star picks. It's worth mentioning that Mualani's best budget option is a free-to-play craftable 2, making her an extremely accessible unit for free-to-plays and newer players. This means that regardless of how long you've been playing the game, Mualani will manage to find value on your account one way or another. An excellent pull all around, only bogged down by the fact that we already have such a supreme cast of staple Hydro characters, powerful enough to make Mualani not feel necessary, and plentiful enough to not require Mualani specifically for the Imaginarium Theater. So a great pull if you aren't already swimming in Hydros. I'm so sorry, man. And a pretty good pull if you are, since her playstyle is still very individual to herself. A fantastic and accessible unit that I can wholeheartedly recommend. She's going into S tier when it comes to the value charts for this specific version. Then for the rerun character that'll be debuting alongside Mualani's release, Kazuha. Wind Lad here, despite not being an absolute necessity like he once was, is still quite the behemoth pull. He offers many things such as damage bonus percent, 4VV, and the ability to hold really high value weapons which reduce team-wide ER requirements, such as Favonia's and Zephos' Moonlight. He works in so many teams that it's unreal. Pretty much any non-Geo and non-Bloom team can use him. We all know how Kazuha synergizes excellently with many old units, but I should mention how powerful he is with current day units that have a lot of strength. Nervalette, Arlecchino, Linny, and even for the more decent level characters such as Clorand, Kazuha is a godsend. His team options are extremely vast, and there is an 80% chance, roughly speaking, that Kazuha works really well with your main DPS. The existence of characters like Farina, who provide infinitely more damage bonus than Kazuha with way more consistency, and Xian Yun, who helps more specialized teams such as Plunge Diluc or Gaming teams, do indeed negate him being a must-pull, as it entirely depends on your mains. I'm not going to tell somebody who mains Alhaitham, Navia, and Xiao to pull for Kazuha over pulling for Xian Yun, who works well with both Navia and Xiao as an arbitrary example. It's undeniable that he's great to have around for Imaginarium Theater, however, and he dropped from the number 1 character in the game to number 3, perhaps number 2 depending on who you ask. And even if you disagree, he still lands in your top 5 either way. Dude is quite the fossil unit, having come out way back in 1.6, and the fact that he's still such a competitive unit in the meta to this day, even in version 5.0, proves nothing more to me than the fact that his shelf life is insane. How much longer do you have to wait until you're convinced that his shelf life is infinite? He's amazing for free-to-plays, has absolutely stood the test of time, and he doesn't suddenly fall off the more characters that you start to own. Dare I say that he actually becomes better with the more characters that you collect, because so many of them are going to be wanting Kazuha, and the fact that the 3 strongest DPSs in the game as of now, Nervalette, Arlecchino, and Linny, all want Kazuha should speak for itself. Amazing unit that obviously lands himself at the top of S tier. If you don't have Kazuha and are stuck between a Mualani versus Kazuha debate in your mind, Kazuha. Kazuha all the way. He is a support who is omnipotent throughout many excellent teams in the game, whereas Mualani is a DPS that wants supports tailored to you specifically. Both have high value, don't get me wrong, but Kazuha is simply too based for me to not wholeheartedly recommend. Kinich, my beloved. He is a burning and burgeon based Dendro DPS who specializes in high mobility combat with extremely high boss killing potential. He'll be a peak choice in the Spiral Abyss most likely, and he also proves to have a rather interesting method of traversing the overworld with his grappling hook. Also, he has the coolest burst in the game, and is the hottest of all the Notlon characters for sure. This is a character that I recommend to players who are older and have a more fleshed out roster. This is because he's most likely going to be tied to Emily, who is currently on banners, acting as this burning and burgeon unit's best partner in crime. While I consider Emily to be a good character, I don't recommend her to new players at all because of how niche she is. She fills in for a Dendro archetype that also requires quite heavy investment, being burning teams. Burning is EM based, but you aren't playing burning for burning itself. You need the reaction because the characters you want to burn have some sort of passive, which makes their talent damage stronger, making burning teams more crit based. This makes burning inherently more resource demanding, and while Kinich is going to lean more into Burgeon I imagine, which does have Dendro cores involved, his personal DPS is still going to end up being quite significant. And we all know how much investment some DPS characters can suck up, so both Kinich and Emily are very resource demanding. His team also requires quite a few 5-star units to function. Kinich, Yelan, Xiangling, and Emily is just a random example, but replace Xiangling for Malvu Ika in the future and that's all 5-star units, one of which being a relatively niche unit. That's not a big deal for late game players, but it kinda sucks for newer ones. Even if you were to go for a more flexible alternative like Kinich, Farina, Xiangling, and Baizhu, not a whole lot of people are gonna have Baizhu either. I do believe that Kinich is going to be a genuinely powerful Dendro DPS, and he's going to be the third dedicated Dendro DPS added into the game upon his release. So not only does he take advantage of a unique reaction, but he himself is inherently a rare type of unit, as Dendro characters are almost always relegated to being support units. He doesn't power creep Alhaitham either, because he covers the one team archetype that Alhaitham does not, allowing them to live in harmony. I do still think Alhaitham is a better pull for newer players, even if Kinich ends up being a lot stronger DPS-wise, simply because the guy can use a 3-star weapon, extremely cheap teammates, and then hit the ground running, whereas you have a lot of groundwork to lay out with Kinich, compared to one of his competitors this patch, Mualani, who can literally use Xinyan. It's hard to recommend him to folks with less fleshed out rosters, especially if you don't have a Kazuha, since he's also rerunning this patch. But if you are an older player and you have a large cast of characters to pick from, Kinich is going to be one hella potent boss killer with lots of single target potential. Amazing character with a lot of future potential once Malvu Ika eventually gets added into the game, though for newer players I'd recommend that you steer clear. There are other units this patch that have much cheaper and more flexible teams in my opinion, and so for that reason he's going into A tier. I could talk about how good Raiden is because she's a popular character, or I could be honest. So my main issue with Raiden is simple. Her DPS does not keep up with modern teams whatsoever. Even a C2 R1 Raiden is on par with a C0 R1 Nervalette, and Raiden's comps past C3 don't really improve her own damage. She is pretty much perpetually locked below the standard of modern DPS units no matter what way you look at it. She does have good front load, but so do Navia and Vapolini. C2 Raiden used to be on the level of a C6, but DPS standards have risen drastically since Inazuma's era. She is not really an impressive DPS anymore. She's good, don't get me wrong, and her DPS in Chevrolet's overload teams is definitely still serviceable, especially if your Chevrolet is at C6, but Raiden's main deal isn't in DPSing so much anymore. Rather, it's in utility. You can build her on Foliem and run her in Hyperbloom teams. You'd think that this is common knowledge, but if you look in game, most people are still opting for a DPS build. If you're at C0, Hyperbloom is going to be a better use of your Raiden. Otherwise, you can use her as a driver for ER heavy teams like Farina, Yelan, Double Hydro, which is a pretty strong team core to run. Though, those aren't really reasons to pull Raiden. Kuki Shinobu has replaced her in Hyperbloom pretty comfortably. Dare I say that Kuki was always better due to being a healer as well. And both Kokomi plus Hu Tao can drive Double Hydro cores, arguably with the Tao variant doing the most DPS out of the whole bunch. And with Kokomi you can either swap Jean for Kazuha or for more damage bonus percent. So Raiden isn't be all end all here either. Raiden feels irrelevant once you've collected a lot of characters. Clorand is a much better Electro DPS, who can also play as an Overload DPS for the record. She's replaced in Hyperbloom by a 4-star, and better Double Hydro drivers exist. You really are only pulling for Raiden if you're a simp. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm a huge fan of Venti and Ganyu, but Raiden is not anywhere near top 5. However, she is really good for new players. This is because she will work with basically anybody while doing quite well, making her extremely flexible. Plus, it takes a long time to collect enough 5-star characters to the point where Raiden becomes irrelevant, making her a pretty long-living option for free-to-plays. I should mention that Raiden is a great free-to-play unit, but a mid-low spender unit. A low spender can get 1 5-star per patch easily. As a low spender myself, before I ever did any whaling for Farina, I got 1 5-star per patch very easily with Welkin. I didn't get Battle Pass every time, mostly just Welkin. I did win most of my 50-50s, I will be honest, but a low spender is getting way more 5-stars than a free-to-play over time. So for that reason, a long-lasting low spender is not going to need Raiden as much. I'd feel bad not mentioning that Raiden is extremely easy to play though. A lot of newer characters, barring Nervalette, require proper execution to hit the ground running. Vape Linny is extremely powerful, but only if you can actually use it. The reason why casuals oftentimes feel like Raiden is so good is because she gets her job done extremely easily. She's very accessible to people who may have difficulty of coordination and those sorts of problems too, and those players matter as well. So if we consider the human experience, then Raiden suddenly becomes a lot more respectable. Overall, with that being said, in 2024, I have such a hard time recommending Raiden after she, yes, fell off. This is fine. It is natural. Venti fell off, then came back during Sumeru. Zhongli fell off, then came back during Fontaine. And now Raiden fell off in Fontaine and will eventually come back in some way. It is literally just the cycle of an Archon's life to live both their release patch and the next region. It's not that hard to fathom if you think about it. Also, C2 to 3 Raiden is still solid, but only if you already have it. Don't go out of your way for it anymore. Invest all that into current Fontaine DPSs instead. B tier in the value rankings. I don't have a high opinion of her. It might be worth asking plenty of people what they think about Raiden so that you can compare and contrast positive opinions about her as well. I'll briefly discuss Kachina because she interests me. She's a normal 4-star Geo sub DPS on the surface, but my interest in her is more so because she can hold a Night Soul damage percent buffing set. So finally we have a competent 4-star Geo buffer for Navia. This is great because Chiori has an inherent anti-synergy with Navia, being a sub DPS and not a buffer, also wanting constructs while dealing with Navia's constructless teams. Kachina saves you so many Primogems since you want C1R1 Chiori to really feel her presence with Navia. She's still best in slot for at C0R0, or well, was before Kachina, but that's more so because of her own damage being decent and Navia's of her partner Geo options not providing enough to compete with Chiori's sub DPS. Which is still gimped in Navia teams though. Kachina gets to take full advantage of her potential in Navia teams, while also buffing Navia's own damage and saving you having to pull a whole of her limited 5-star, a copy of them, and their weapon. She also does some sub DPS of her own, and at C6, Kachina is most likely going to be able to compete with a C0R0 Chiori's output in Navia teams. And considering she's free, Navia mains all get to try her out at C0. And for those of you who understand the cost system, which is mostly a complex speedrunning thing, so casuals, you can ignore this, Navia can now run a good 1-cost team of Navia, Kachina, Bennett, and Xiangling. For those of you who are clueless about cost, just know that this is also a really good cheap Navia team that you can play. Also making Navia one of the most accessible DPSs in the game. 2 of the units are free, and the other is an extremely contested 4-star in general, so free-to-players should be able to find easy access to it. Kachina on the whole is going to be a very decent 4-star. She'll mostly only be used with Navia, but that's fine because she's a highly accessible 4-star character. Even with that being said, Kachina isn't all that niche because she can run as a 4th slot buffer in any team that isn't ruined by Geo application. I'm sure that you can all imagine I'm delighted by all of this. Thank you Hoyoverse, we finally got our damn Navia buffer. Sure, the buffing might not be within the kit itself, but artifact set buffing does make a big difference in my opinion. 4-piece Instructors, 4-piece Noblesse, 4-piece Tenacity of the Millilith, 4-piece Veritas and Venerer, you get the idea. If you're pulling for Shilonen, I wouldn't invest too much into Kachina, since there's a large chance that the Leopard will be replacing her role. With that being said, that's assuming you're interested in Shilonen in the first place, and the fact that we get Kachina for free and she's already a better teammate than C0R0 Chiori for Navia out of the box, makes her a very respectable unit in my opinion. If this is how good Kachina is, then how good will Shilonen be for Navia? I should also mention the banners take months at a time to come back. Years if you're an unlucky ducky. So Kachina being free and always permanently accessible is a big win to her. I'm definitely pro Kachina here. A tier on the value rankings. The thing is, she's free anyway, so you'd only be pulling for constellations. With that being said, be careful with pulling 4-star cons if you don't want multiple copies of the 5-star banner character. There is literally only good units to pull this patch, and even if some are a lot better than others in my opinion, they all each have their place in the game, and there is something for every different type of player here. I myself am after Kinich the most out of this whole bunch, and I'll definitely be building Kachina since she'll be a formidable Navia teammate. Hopefully this video was able to tell you who'd get you the best bang for your Primogem in version 5.0. This has been Juice signing out, and design-wise, Kinich clears literally everybody this patch.